That's right, guys. Pegasus and the Wise Guys, welcome back to the page. A new tech time, including a green light, a messenger of peace, and even a fire prison. Let's talk about it. Let's get into it.
Welcome back to the page, guys. A new tech time for the new year. I had to wait for a little bit. On my last one, did a little bit of numbers, but we're going to do some numbers today. Mystic Mine is the card that we're talking about today because we're replacing it. Now, yes, there is a portion of the game of players that probably got wiped completely out of the game because, well, let's face it, Mystic Mine getting hit killed a lot of people's win strategy. What I wanted to talk about is where this card can be replaced in specific decks. I'm not going to say a lot of different decks, but a specific deck that you may be playing right now that I've been seeing pop up. Messenger of Peace is one of those cards inside of Runic, and I definitely like the power level because, well, let's face it, mine was a huge hit. You lost Runic, you lost the half of Runic's win con, basically, and you didn't really have anything to replace it. But au contraire, you have a card like Messenger of Peace. They work together in tandem, basically, guys, because while the Runic Fountain is in the field zone and you're able to slap your opponent over the head with continuous spells in an endless fashion, not necessarily endless, but putting them on the bottom and then drawing and milling your opponent's deck out. A card like Messenger of Peace basically becomes a pseudo mine, although not searchable. You could play a card like Prosperity. Messenger of Peace sitting next to specific cards like, well, let's face it, there can be only one. Maybe a goes in match, maybe even a rivalry, I don't know. Whatever floodgate that you want to stick it next to, even a skill drain. The bottom line of it is you want to be able to have another floodgate, whittle your opponent's monsters down to one, and then lock them under a very irritating effect of not being able to attack with anything of 1500 or more attack. Usually, guys, when you whittle them down or you skill drain them, the Messenger of Peace really increases in power, and it then increases even more in power when you put it inside of a deck like Runic because, well, in the past you were taking the field zone and taking it completely out of rotation and putting mine on the board and then hoping and praying that they couldn't deal with mine. Although you did have cards to protect it, it definitely wasn't the most powerful strategy ever. I actually think it got a little bit more powerful with Messenger because you have a mine-like effect and the ability to stop them from getting rid of it with the runic spells anyway. And then if they're stuck under a Messenger of Peace, it's like having mine on the field, which has never been done. So a lot of times when cards get hit, it makes room for new innovation, and I definitely like Messenger of Peace, and I've been seeing it pop up in a lot of Runic lists as of late. It was, I think it was down in Oklahoma, and then I've just seen it over and over and over again. Really like the card, and it's one of my favorite artworks ever. I mean, good Lord, I love the artwork. Messenger of Peace. Peace be upon you. Fire Prison is the next card I wanted to talk about. You saw it in the deck profile with George. Love the card. There's a reason why he was playing, and I feel like a lot of people didn't maybe catch on to it, so I wanted to talk about it. The essential effect that we're getting down to is that monsters cannot attack except link monsters. It just randomly says that in the middle of the card. Now, obviously, the other effect, which says if any link monsters on the field, neither player can link summon a link monster with a lower link rating than the highest link rating on the field, which means you can cheat out a big link and then slap this card on your opponent and lock them out. It's meant for Cybers, really, and maybe it could help a dragon deck in some kind of way, but really it's meant for Cybers. And while the card is definitely an interesting card in Cybers, I don't think it ever makes any list. However, if you're looking for a mine replacement, that's pretty strong because being able to essentially have this card on the field and then back it up with a card like, well, yeah, it definitely is something that you have to consider as well because you can't summon anyway, and then you wouldn't be able to attack. So you see where the lock is. That's minus, right? Right. You may have never seen this card. Maybe you've seen it before. Let's move on. Summoning Curse. Not necessarily stopping what your opponent is doing, but punishing them each time that they want to try to go off. If a monster or monsters is special summoned, the current controller of that monster or monsters banishes one card from their hand. And that keeps triggering. That's not limited to once per turn. Once per turn during your end phase, you can pay 500 life points to destroy this card. Bad in time, but very, very good early in the game as a floodgate that people really forget about. I feel like people really forget about this card and how strong it can be. I'm not going to say build an entire strategy around it. I'm just going to say it's something that you have to consider as well. Now, obviously, when you have a setup like that, I had to mention a card like Dark Bribe. as well as Solemn Judgment, the obvious cards that can obviously protect the runic board. I definitely feel like that's really, really strong. And then being able to essentially protect those same locks of Fire Prison with those same cards, I definitely like that as well. The last tech, a little bit of kind of messing around. These are just cards that I have been messing around with in different decks, Cyber Valley and Sided Runic, as well as KcCard. You definitely want to try that out, just because it can stop a battle phase, it can take monsters off the field, it can stack your deck. There's a lot of interesting stuff that Cyber Valley can do, and it's an overlooked card that people always forget about. Another overlooked card is Genomics Fighter, which it really is a Birdman, but it can also manipulate levels and mess around, and maybe there's some kind of contribution that it can make inside of a deck, but really that's up to you. I've just seen people experimenting with it inside of Runic as well, and it really is interesting because you can go into 5s, or you can adjust and use the 6 if you actually tribute over the top of something. It's just something pretty strong. Maybe you can set up something like a Synchro 6 to be able to go into plays anyway, like you do inside of Runic. So maybe this is another one based on Runic, but it can be mixed inside of other decks as well. Genomics Fighter is an interesting card. I'm not going to say it's the most broken card, but it's definitely something strong that's possible. Face-up attack position monsters on the field cannot activate their effects. Well, that's really, really interesting with the card that I already mentioned before. So that may be something that you want to look into as well. And shout out to George, because that really is what he based that deck on. And the last tech before we get out of here is Herald of Greenlight. I feel like it's a forgotten about card. A lot of people are still trying to play Tier Ishizu, and they may have just totally whiffed on this card still being a card. And there's a lot of power spells that aren't Dark Ruler that still can make a high impact on you. And being able to pitch this and a fairy still is probably something you should have in your deck. Or again, as I always say, at least consider it. If it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Pegasus out. Ciao, belle. Arrivederci.